Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. And in today's video, I'm going to go over an area in chapter 9. It's basically located towards the end of the chapter, but it's really an important concept. And I'm asked this a lot by students because the concept and what we're going to talk about is intensity, right? So there's a number of different variables that ACE wants you to understand. I'm going to pull up our digital textbook here so you can get an idea of what we're talking about. So when you get to the page 375, muscular training variables related to program design, they're going to give you bullet points, and these are all of the subheadings that are bolded over the next couple of pages. So these guys right here, all needs assessment, right, exercise frequency, yada yada, all the way down. They're going to go over with you over the next couple of pages. So, of course, read through these. You don't have to take a whole lot of notes with this because they do speak to each one of these issues at other points in the textbook. They're giving you, for the most part, sort of an overview concept of what they're going to discuss later with you. So, needs assessment, by the way, very practical, real world information. Definitely want to conduct a needs assessment. Then the concept of training frequency, exercise selection and order. And then we get to training volume. And at some point, I'll probably go over table 9-12 with you. It's a good idea to memorize it. But here's what I wanted to get into, which was training intensity. And one of the reasons is because for those of you that are taking this and going to take this exam and you want to be a trainer, it's because you yourself are exercising and training. And you know that when I'm talking about this material, you're thinking about how you're going to apply it to yourself in your own training. That's why I have constantly asking me, can you explain what they mean by training intensity? And, is it all about the amount of weight? How do we judge it? How do we gauge it? And how do we apply it into programming for our clients? ACE does a pretty good job of explaining it right here. And that's why I want to go over with you. And if you read this one paragraph right here, it speaks to, for the most part, and this is on page 380, percentage of maximal resistance or the level of fatigue that you take somebody to, irrespective of the resistance, irrespective of the number of repetitions. So let me get out of there for a second. I want you to take a deep breath. This is my recommendation, is that you write some of this stuff down. Here's the issue with intensity. For the most part, we have to be able to measure these variables. Now think about this for a second. I can measure volume. What is volume? It's the total number of repetitions that a person performs, either in a particular set or in an entire workout, right? So volume is pretty straightforward from a measuring perspective. Okay. It's not subjective, it's objective. If I do three sets of 10 repetitions on the bench press, it doesn't matter what type of weight I use. It doesn't matter whether I took it to failure or not. I did 3 sets of 10 repetitions. What is my volume for that particular exercise? 30 reps. It's objective. It doesn't matter whether the weight you used was light. It doesn't matter whether the reps you used were heavy and you can just barely get through it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if you used 100 pounds or you used 500 pounds. The concept of volume is basically number of total repetitions. Now, don't get me wrong. You could, if you're a power lifter, for instance, when I train power lifters, I'm going to add on poundage, but that's for a competitive lifter, not for the average 99.99% of every other human being you're ever going to train. So volume is easy. It's intensity that is always kind of, difficult to measure when it comes to objective measures, which is why you have probably learned, or you've read, or you've seen somewhere, the concept of the percent of 1 rep max. That is one way. And that's what ACE is telling you, is that an objective way to calculate intensity. My training is more intense than your training because I used 90% of my 1 rep max. for instance, in a bench press or squat or deadlift. Okay, so from that perspective, it can be very objective. I use 300 pounds, which is 90%, because I've already calculated my 1 rep max. Okay, if I know that my 1 rep max for my bench press is 400 pounds, then I can gauge my intensity by doing percent of 1 rep max. Does that make sense? So the intensity of my training, I train very intense. Well, that's a subjective comment. However, I can gauge my volume and intensity by using a objective measure, which would be percent of 1 rep max. Where is the problem with that with the average client? Well, first of all, honestly, I'm never doing a 1 rep max with any client. Even with most athletes, to be honest with you, I never do 1 rep maxes. I never do triples with average athletes. There's only one athlete that I ever do lower than 5 or 6 repetitions. In the real world, you never do that. Why are you doing that? There's only one athlete that you do that with. That's a competitive power lifter or an Olympic lifter, which you're probably not going to be dealing with. If you are, you get the idea. But for the most part, the average person, you're never doing 1 rep maxes. Okay, so just don't even bother doing that. And by the way, 1 rep max really only works on big compound exercises. And there's basically 3, 4, maybe 5 bench press, squats, maybe shoulder presses, maybe bent over rows, and maybe straight deadlifts, which I don't do with people anyway. But I hope you get the idea that the concept of intensity, one way to gauge it is through the 1 rep max. There's nothing wrong with that. It is an objective measure that we can use. And that's what ACE is explaining to you. And once again, they do pretty stand-up job of explaining that, right? So right here, define training intensity as the percentage of maximal resistance used in an exercise, right? So 90 pounds, higher intensity. You get the idea is that, technically, because I used a higher resistance or a higher percentage of my 1 rep max, then I train, quote, more intense than another individual. Okay, you get that. So nobody cares that you train more intense than anybody else. Anyway, not for the average client. It's irrelevant. We use that concept of intensity as a way to gauge volume and intensity protocols. You get it? So I hope you understand that. But the other way, and ACE also explains this, is the similar levels of fatigue. I hope you can see that right here. See, I'm underlining that right there. Fatigue. So fatigue level then becomes another objective. Yes, it's actually an objective measure. And why? Because if I don't worry about the weight. Don't worry about the amount of weight, and don't even worry about the number of repetitions. Let's just say I'm doing a bench press. You don't know how much weight I'm using, but I do a bench press and I get 4 reps, 5 reps, 6 reps, and I get to the point where at my 7th rep, I literally can, and that's it. I can't do another rep. Well, technically, that is high intensity. Why? Because fatigue was now the defining variable. What if I told you on that 7th rep and I put the weight down, it was 100 pounds? You'd be like, man, 100 pounds? Gee, I do 300. Well, no, that's not what we're talking about. You get the idea is that the objective measure was now the point to fatigue. If I got to fatigue, boom, then technically I reached a high level of intensity. 100 pounds, 7 reps. What if on my next set, instead of doing 7 reps, I did 4 reps, 1, 2, 3, 4, and put the weight back? It's still 100 pounds. Which one was a higher intensity set? Well, if you look at the total amount of resistance I used, right, percent of 1 rep max, they're both the same. But I only did 4 reps on one, 7 on another, and 7 was fatigue. Which one is more intense? You get the idea? So quite often what we do is with our clients is we call something high intensity. Technically, it's high intensity, but we're using subjective measures. In other words, I'm bleeding out of my eyes, or you know what I'm saying. Okay, that was a little bit over the top, but you get the idea is that I trained intense because I'm sweating more, I'm breathing harder. No. Those are subjective measures. the point here is that if we're going to develop programming, and that's why ACE is telling you this, if you're going to develop programming, you have to have objective measures. That's the whole reason why they give you repetition ranges. That's why they talk about volume and training protocols, and why high volume generally correlates with low intensity workouts and vice versa. We know that if you're going to be taking, exercise sets to fatigue where you are completely fatigued, boom, more than likely, because that's quote high intensity, right? Because I went to complete muscle fatigue on that set, okay? Technically, total volume of that exercise and workout is going to be lower. Get the idea? They're inversely related. I can use 100 pounds for a bench press and do 20 reps and never fatigue. Boom, 18, 19, 20. Boom, high volume. Yes, high volume, but was it intense? Quote, intense? No, it wasn't intense at all because I never went to fatigue. So the whole point here, and the reason I wanted to go over this with you, is to make sure that you're not confused about these different terms and these different variables. So, and again, ACE will tell you, by the way, this is the whole concept, or helps you with the concept of periodization. When developing an exercise program for a client who is new, this here is kind of the point behind all of this. The concepts of training intensity, training volume. Remember, a lot of this comes from on high, from athletic training, and it dribbled down to the average client. And then what do? We train them, we do lots of repetitions, or we train them to failure. No. Do yourself a big favor. Stop beating the patootie out of your clients, especially when they're new. Why? Because their bodies are not ready for it. They're not ready to go to extreme. They're not ready to go to failure on every set. You keep the intensity, quote, the intensity relatively moderate to low while getting their volume up. The more volume that they're capable of doing, they'll increase intensity, but the more volume they're able to do, the greater adaptability they will then have to more energy output, exercise output, right? Their ability to do more work will increase. And that's basically what they're telling you here in this paragraph. The goal here is, now look, I'm circling the word adherence. To progress in intensity too quickly can lead to excessive muscle soreness, injury, providing reasons. There it is. Look, the average person, if it hurts, they ain't coming back. To a certain extent, they're not. I'm also not saying don't work the person. That's not what ACE is saying. What ACE is telling you is be smart about this. Understand that training intensity needs to be modulated, because with new clients, especially individuals with very little experience in resistance training, they can get sore real easy. And then they can get demotivated. We don't want that. So we want to start people off. It's not necessary to take people to total failure, especially when you're using heavier resistance. It's one of the reasons why, especially for new clients, real world, I'm staying in the 8 to 12, sometimes 15 rep range. I'm making sure that they don't necessarily go to fatigue too soon. As their physical output increases, that concept of training intensity can now be applied more effectively in conjunction with training volume. Just keep in mind, even too much training volume can cause overtraining scenarios. Too sore, high intensity stuff, overtraining issues, right? Full body fatigue, way too high of a volume. Don't be doing 5 sets when people are first training on bench presses, just as a for instance. Just keep in mind that what ACE is trying to help you to understand here is that those concepts are really, really important to understand. Don't do too much, because it could be demotivating. It could get clients to the point where they have little to no interest in training. So I hope this was helpful, because again, some of these concepts can be a little confusing. Now, when it comes to a testing perspective, ACE can ask you different questions related to something related to intensity, where you're training a new client. They'll give you a scenario, just so you know. They'll give you a scenario. A new client's been training with you for for 2 weeks and you decide to do blah, 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 what would be the possible outcome of doing too high of an intensity or high intensity, low volume training? What would be the possible outcomes? And you might see something like extreme muscle soreness, and whatever other answers, you would then understand that more than likely higher intensity training will lead to DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, just as an idea. So again, always a pleasure to bring this information to you. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. Remember to subscribe to our channel, share it if you know that there are folks that are interested in this type of material, and ring the notification bell so that you know when the new information is coming out. Best of luck if you are taking the ACE exam here within the next couple of days or weeks. Please let us know how you do on the exam as well in the comments section. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.